Did you ever have a dream that was too big as a little kid? This is a story about an orphaned young boy who had a dream to be one of the top basketball players in the world. Years later, he has to work as a storekeeper and go to school when he realizes how hard it is to achieve this dream. Regardless, he practices every night on his own, until a scout randomly finds him. He's introduced to a super-secret competition that can decide whether he'll make it to the big leagues or never be signed. The only issue is that he's against other top players in the country who are ready to cut each other's throats to win the competition. The story begins in the summer of 2024, in the West Coast Overtime Elite Tryouts. The game is free-for-all, and all competitors compete against each other. The crowd is very excited and cheers on their favorite contestant. Meanwhile, in a VIP section of the stadium, some high-ranking individuals watch the game and consider young blood that they can invest in. A nearby monitor displays that the top players among the contestants are three individuals named Malik, Carter, and Eli. One of the VIP members is amazed since it's his first time seeing the Overtime Elite tryouts in person. He declares that 9 players are participating in the tryouts, and their job is to score on each other at the same time since there are no teams. On the basketball court, several guys are seen reaching out for the ball and trying to grab it from every other person. The VIP member continues by saying the free-for-all seems chaotic. While watching all 9 contestants try to grab one ball, he wonders if this is really basketball since it defies the norm. Meanwhile, one of the contestants quickly grabs the ball and hurries to score a point, while the others, who are shocked by how fast he moved, look at him from behind. One of the scouts in the VIP section, Gray, who has been watching the game all along, explains to the investors that the Overtime Elite Academy only accepts players with the highest potential from around the world. He further explains that these tryouts are meant to vet raw talent to see if any of the contestants are worthy of their consideration. The fat cat investor questions his ideologies, wondering how such a brute game is testing anything. He believes all 9 contestants are just wrestling for the ball, and this doesn't tell them which of them is a good player. Gray decides to ask him a simple question to prove his point. He asks him how it's possible to train the next generation of prodigies to be greater than all the players before them. Meanwhile, on the basketball court, the guy who had taken the ball still manages to hold on to it despite the other members being on his tail. Gray decides to answer his own question when he doesn't get a reply by saying the simple way to do that is to eliminate everything people know about basketball and build them anew. He claims that it is from such a form of chaos that a new wild card with new possibilities is born. He also corrects the investor's mistake that there are just 9 players on the court, and informs him that he would have noticed that there are actually 10 if he was paying attention. Meanwhile, the guy with the ball successfully blows past everyone behind him, and it seems that he's not planning to let go of the ball anytime soon. Oddly, he runs into one guy who just stands in front of the hoop, waiting for him. He wonders what the guy is doing just standing in front of the hoop like a moron, but he decides to just blow past him like he had done to everyone else. As he rushes past him, the new guy quickly hits the ball from off his hands, shocking him. Our new guy asks him where he thinks he's going and quickly moves away with the ball, to his dismay. The new guy runs away with the ball at breakneck speed, literally leaving trails of lightning sparks behind him. He easily gaps the rest of the guys and moves towards the hoop, determined to score a point. He tells his opponent, who is still stunned to see that he has lost the ball, that he feels quite lucky. To make it clearer, he explains that he's quite lucky to be playing next to predictable trash like him because it easily makes him look like a god. The scout continues to explain to the VIP members, who are now getting angry at his analysis. He tells them that each contestant can choose to play conventionally if their goal is to be another player. But the only issue with that is that Overtime Elite only recruits the greatest athletes. He explains that from an academy full of wildcards, they'll finally be able to craft a legend that is very different from what the world has seen. He stops talking to focus on the amazing thing going on in the court, as the new guy who had just taken the ball leaps towards the hoop to make a dunk. In a split second, he smashes the ball in the hoop, still carrying streaks of lighting with him due to his speed. We quickly move to a different scenery. A kid named Omari sits in front of an old TV and watches a basketball game. He explains that when you're young, they tell you to dream big and to try to reach for the stars, so he did. As a kid, he tells himself that he's going to dominate the world of pro league players, and the entire world is going to know him. Years later, he ends up as a cashier at a candy store, and he recalls the good old days. He calls bull on the people who told him to reach for the stars as a kid. While he's picking his nose, a kid who is shopping in the store asks him for the price of one of the candy bars. Omari tells him it's $2, and the kid exclaims, surprised by how expensive it is. The kid tells him to screw himself because the candy bar isn't even worth $1 and runs towards the door with it. Omari angrily climbs the counter to pounce on the kid and asks him where he thinks he's going with the candy bar. The kid doesn't answer but only wags his tongue at him as he proceeds to escape with his prize. In an unexpected turn of events, Omari throws a nearby bag at the kid and it lands on his head. After forcefully taking the money, he puts it in the cash register. The kid, who now has a bump on his head from where the bag hit him, apologizes to Omari and calls him sir, afraid that he's going to get into more trouble. Omari just tells him to get out of the store. Jonathan, the store owner, who had witnessed the whole thing, thanks Omari for dealing with the thief. He tells him he can head out since he plans to close up for the night and hands him his paycheck. Our guy is excited to have an early day off and receive his paycheck at the same time, so he quickly grabs the offer. As he heads out, he tells Jackson he's the man and happily leaves the store. On his way home, he thinks about a popular quote that says that fear is the stealer of dreams. He wonders how a person can have dreams in such a world. He quickly retrieves the cash and squeezes the empty envelope. As he thinks about how life drags you in every direction, he throws the envelope into a nearby trash can and is excited by how accurate he is. As he continues home, he passes by the basketball court and notices some kids playing a game. He decides to stop and stare for a while. As he watches them, he looks closely and is intrigued by how intense the match is going. He decides it's best he looks away so he doesn't go home late and makes his way across the road. The moment he gets home, he tosses his bag on the ground and quickly grabs his basketball. He quickly greets his auntie and tells her he has come to drop off his stuff and he'll be right back. As he tries to tiptoe out the door so she doesn't ask him too many questions, she comes out to meet him and asks him where he thinks he's going. She quickly takes that stance big aunties take when you're about to get in trouble and tells him she needs him to prepare dinner, and his little cousin, Cassie, needs him to help with her homework. She also reminds him that he hasn't done his own homework, and our guy starts to frown, realizing that he's never going to get to play basketball. He tries to explain to her that he just wanted to shoot a few baskets before coming back home, but she quickly takes hold of his ears and drags him away with it, telling him that he can go play basketball after his chores. As she drags him away, Omari drops the basketball, and she tells him that his family needs him right now, but basketball will always be there. Our guy grudgingly decides to wash the plates, while his auntie stands right behind him with her arms crossed to ensure he does his chores. It's not also like he has a choice anyway, grudgingly or not. He thinks to himself and wonders how his life would be if he was allowed to focus on the things he actually wanted to do. Later on, he helps his little cousin, who looks very determined, to draw her ABCs. After that, our guy coughs as he takes out the trash bags because of how much it stinks. In his aunt's defense, it's not like he didn't contribute to the trash. Later that night, Omari is seen in his room doing his homework. The room is plastered with several basketball posters and looks like every other teenage room. As he works on his homework, his table clock lets out a sound that lets him know it's 1:07 a.m. at midnight. He decides that he needs a break, so he leaves the room and goes to check on Cassie, whom he finds asleep. He goes to the living room and finds his auntie asleep on the table after working for several hours on some papers. The papers on the table seem to be some patient's test results from the Brooklyn hospital. Omari just stares at her and reaches into his pocket to bring out something. He drops his paycheck from his job at the store on the table, leaving it for her to find when she wakes up. He makes his way to his room's window and escapes out of it with his basketball. Meanwhile, in the dead of night, the scout from the overtime elite tryouts walks past the basketball court after having drunk a little bit too much with his friends. He holds his head in pain, obviously having a hangover, and wonders why his friends always drink so hard. As he receives an incoming call on his phone, he remembers that he has to wake up to scout a game the next morning, which is going to be a total pain now that he has a hangover. He starts to curse, wondering what kind of mess he's gotten himself into. Meanwhile, right on the court next to him, Omari is seen bouncing his basketball. The scout is immediately drawn to the sound of the basketball and notices Omari, who is in his basketball clothes, bouncing the ball and moving across the court. He wonders what such a kid is doing out on the court so late. As he watches closely, he also wonders why our guy isn't shooting but just bouncing. He's shocked when the realization suddenly hits him. From Omari's movement, Gray easily deduces that he's playing against someone, but there's no one there. It seems like he has an imaginary opponent, or he's playing against a ghost. Omari, who is entirely focused on the game, doesn't notice the man who is watching him and is just playing the ball, hoping to win the game against whoever he's playing with. Our guy locks eyes with his imaginary opponent and inches toward the hoop, blocking the opponent's attempt to grab the ball from him. When he finds an opening to score, a smirk develops on his face. But Gray, who is still watching, just thinks he must be crazy. As Omari continues to mop the floor with his imaginary opponent, the scout wonders what kind of kid comes out to the court at this time of the night to play against themselves. He wonders why he is forming imaginary opponents, but his attention is quickly drawn away by his legwork. He decides that this may actually be what they've been looking for. As he watches him make a dunk in the hoop, he decides this must be the wild card they've been looking for. Gray smiles to himself and reasons that this terrible walk may not be a waste after all, and this may be destiny. As Omari lands on his feet, he suddenly hears a sound and notices the presence of someone else other than himself. He looks outside the court towards the place where the scout is standing, but he finds no one there except some leaves carried by the wind. As the days go by, Omari becomes weary and tired of the boring cycle of his life. At work, he pouts at the sound of little kids excitedly approaching him to buy candy and other things. At school, he falls asleep and drools all over the table while his teacher rants over his terrible behavior and his classmates look at him. Our guy explains that he feels torn in every direction. When he gets home, he helps Cassie with her homework again, while his auntie continues her work at home. He tells himself that he can't give any of his routines up even if he wants to, especially because they all feel necessary. At midnight, he resumes his match against 4 hefty imaginary opponents, who are hell-bent on not letting him get past them this night. They look like they've had enough of his nonsense and have been training to show him who's boss. Nearby, the scout, who seems to have just left another meeting with some of his guys, watches as Omari plays again. Meanwhile, Omari dribbles the first guy that comes across him, wondering why they're playing aggressively tonight. He asks the other 3 ghosts if they're trying to stop him from driving at the hoop. He decides to dance to their tune and tells them he'll shoot at the hoop from where he is in that case. As he shoots, the imaginary characters rush towards him to block his throw. They can't have him win against them this night. The ball goes across the court and towards the hoop. Unlike what our guy expected, it just hits the metal ring and bounces back. Omari is surprised that he missed, but he's more surprised when a random person catches the ball. It turns out to be Gray, who tells him he's been watching him for about a week now. He tells him he's never seen someone who only plays against their imagination. With a smirk on his face, Gray tells him that someone like him doesn't seem to know how to play with a team. Gray tells him he's unusual, which is interesting, and throws his ball back at him. Omari asks him what he means by him being unusual when he's the one who just admitted to having secretly watched a kid for up to a week. The scout, who is taken aback by his comment, tells him he didn't mean it in that way. He tells him it may be time he plays against a real person to know how it feels, so he challenges him to a game. Our guy doesn't seem so excited but reluctantly agrees. Before they begin, he reminds Gray that he needs to change into comfortable basketball clothes to play. Gray, who just smiles, gives him a key tip and tells him to worry about himself. Gray tells him he would like to make things more interesting, so he unlocks his briefcase. He tells Omari that if he can score on him, he'll give him $10,000, and he exposes the contents of the briefcase, revealing a wad of cash. That amount of money literally starts to emit light at Omari's face, and he staggers backward, wondering if the money is real. As he stares at the money, he reasons that such an amount would really help with things at home. As Gray closes the briefcase, Omari wonders who the heck this guy thinks he is. As a smirk develops across his face, he thinks this guy must be a big shot to be throwing around $10,000 like that. And this makes him want to beat him. Omari excitedly agrees to the game. He reminds the scout that this was his idea, so he tells him not to get mad when he robs him of his money. Gray just smiles at him and calls him a brat. Omari gives a slight chuckle and tells him it's time to play, with an evil look in his eyes. So, at midnight, these two play a game to win $10,000 at the Brooklyn Public Courts in New York City. As Omari bounces the ball, Gray just stands there and doesn't try to take the ball from him. Our guy wonders if this guy is for real since he's just standing there and not taking him seriously. Meanwhile, Gray just focuses on him and tries to deduce his next move. Omari decides that it's fine if he wants to just watch and let him take the money. He needs it more anyway. Omari rushes towards the scout, who heads in his direction to stop him, but he quickly swerves and dribbles him, going the other way. After successfully dribbling and going past the scout, he screams out that the money is his, still with that evil look on his face as he goes to score. Seeing a clear path to the hoop, our guy celebrates the fact that he passed through, so he runs toward the hoop to win his prize. As he leaps towards the hoop to dunk the ball, Gray, who is still behind, commends his dribbling skills, but he suddenly appears behind him and hits the ball against the hoop. The ball hits the flat surface and bounces back, much to Omari's dismay. Gray sarcastically asks him if he's not too confident for someone who talks to ghosts. As they both land on the ground, Omari wonders what an insane block that was. He watches Gray bounce the ball and make his way to the other end of the court, and he wonders how fast he must have moved to close out the distance to come block the ball. Our guy tells himself that he could have sworn that he had gone past him, so he wonders how he was able to block his ball. Omari wonders who the heck this guy is and how he was able to move that fast. Before he can make some sense of what was happening, Gray just looks back at him with a smile and asks him if he's watching. Before he can reply, Gray tells him he's coming and dashes across the court to meet him. He swoops past him in the twinkle of an eye, which makes Omari exclaim. Gray has such a determined look on his face that shows that he's not playing around this time. This annoys Omari, and he tells himself he's not going to let this guy's speed catch him off guard this time. Omari zooms across and covers the distance till he's side by side with the scout. He tells him he's not going to let him pass easily this time, and his quick reaction surprises Gray. Gray commends his quick reaction skills but quickly bounces the ball behind his back to his other arm, which catches Omari off guard. While our guy tries to follow the ball, Gray quickly goes behind him and moves forward with the ball, telling him his reactions may be good, but they're not good enough. Omari watches in horror as he inches close to the hoop, realizing he's about to score. Gray gloriously leaps towards the hoop, and it looks like he's hanging in midair for a couple of seconds. Before our guy can reach him, he throws the ball into the hoop with such force that it almost breaks the hoop. Omari just stands nearby, watching the ball pass through in frustration. When Gray lands back on the ground, he tells Omari that his drive earlier wasn't so bad. He explains that his spin move kept the ball away from him, which left him with two tough choices. The first option was to either try to recover and get between Omari and the basket, which wasn't such a good option. The second option was to exploit an opening after he had passed him. Gray smirks at him and tells him it's obvious he knows what option he chose. He throws the ball back to Omari and proposes that they double the money since he now knows what he's up against. He tells Omari that if he manages to score against him, he's going to give him $20,000 this time. Omari suddenly becomes angry that he would carelessly hinge such a huge amount on one shot and asks Gray if he's mocking him. Gray just smiles and asks him where all his confidence has suddenly gone, referring back to when he said this is going to be easy money. Omari, who is still angry, weighs the situation and realizes that although this man has many obvious openings when you play against him, you realize that it's just a trick. He realizes that this guy is as unconventional a player as it'll ever get, so it's going to take more than just an easy play to win him. Gray just stares at him and lets out a low yawn while Omari weighs his options. Our guy thinks about the money again and realizes he'll get to make all that money if he just scores one ball. He wonders what his auntie will do when she sees all that money. It's going to give her a chance to cool off from work. Gray just smiles as he watches him closely, realizing the weight of the decision that he has to make. Omari also considers that there's the plus of playing against someone this good and getting to weigh his skills against such a pro. He finally makes his decision with a feisty smirk on his face and tells himself that this stuff makes him really excited. When Gray gets tired of waiting, he tells him he's really an odd kid and says that he quit stalling so they can get to the game. Omari just gets right to it and tells him he's right, speeding towards him so he doesn't have much time to block him. He tells Gray it's time to settle this once and for all. As Omari speeds towards him, Gray realizes he's driving towards him even faster than before and starts to contemplate the options he has to stop him from scoring. He reasons that his first option is to cut his lane to the basket by standing in front of him. The second option is to let him pass and try to chase him and block his scoring like he did before. When Omari inches close to him, he decides that he had already blocked the ball before and that'd be predictable, so he decides to just stay in front of him. When Omari notices that the man isn't moving and won't budge, this puts him on high alert, and he reasons that the game isn't going to go as it went before. He quickly starts to calculate his opponent's next move, and he realizes that if he goes straight towards him, the man will cut him off because he's positioned as a defense. He also considers going towards the right, but he realizes that he's still going to run right into him and he'll get blocked. His last option would be to dribble him like he did last time and shoot, but he'd have to slow down, which would give the man enough chance to catch up with him and block him. Suddenly he realizes that the only way to beat a guy like this is to do something that he'd never anticipate from a guy like him. By a guy like him, he means a guy who doesn't have proper training. He has to do something that he'd never expect from a random kid who's always playing by himself and hasn't faced any strong opponents. He has to do something that he wouldn't expect from just a big dreamer who just shows confidence on the outside, but knows he lacks the experience to climb up to the pro leagues. A series of thoughts flash through our guy's mind, and he imagines himself in the pro leagues right in that moment, and he visualizes the hoop that's before him. Omari thinks to himself that it's alright if this man decides to underestimate him. As he moves towards him, he continues to bounce the ball, determined to score. He decides that it's alright if he underestimates him, because that will be in his favor, and a fire lights up in his eyes as he drives forward. When he gets right in front of Gray, he thinks to himself that he's obviously blocking every path in his way, so he shoots the ball right through the opening in his legs. He tells himself that if Gray thinks it's smart to block all his openings, he'll just create a new one. The ball flies through Gray's legs and bounces right behind him. Gray is surprised by what had just happened because he didn't expect it. Before he can recover, Omari runs past him and picks up the ball that had gone through the opening in his legs. With a smile on his face, Omari decides that the money isn't even what's making him so excited. As he gets closer to the hoop, with Gray running frantically behind him, he reasons that what's actually exciting him is that he had forgotten what it was like to play an opponent as good as this. He enjoys the extreme energy. He enjoys the exhilarating sensation. Omari leaps off the ground and prepares to dunk the ball in the hoop while he screams out in excitement. He decides that this is how a basketball game is supposed to feel all the time. Our guy smashes the ball right through the hoop and even watches it fall right through. The energy is intense, and he's having the time of his life. Gray just stares at him smashing in the ball in awe, realizing this kid really beat him. The ball lands on the ground and bounces away. As Omari picks it up, Gray commends his gameplay and tells him he didn't think he had such elite dribbling skills in him. He asks Omari why he chose to take such a risk by throwing the ball through his legs since there was a chance it wouldn't work. Omari just stares at the ball and tells him that in all the scenarios he thought through, he beat him in all of them. So he realized there was only one way to win. The only way to win was to do something neither of them would expect. Gray just stares at him in surprise, wondering how such a kid thought through such amazing game tactics in just a few seconds. A smile develops across Gray's face, and he gets to the issue of the money. He hands him the briefcase and tells him he'll give him the money as promised. Gray tells him the briefcase only contains $10,000, but he'll go get the rest from his car. Omari just sits in front of the briefcase, drooling like a little baby, and he wonders what kind of person just carries around so much money. As he reaches for the briefcase, a ray of imaginary light erupts out of it and hits his happy face. Before he can start counting the money, Gray tells him he has an offer for him, which causes him to quickly look away from the money. He explains that Omari can either take the $20,000 that's currently shining out of the briefcase, or he can take a ticket to the Overtime Elite tryouts. He brings out a silver ticket with several bright colors on it. Omari just looks at him cluelessly, wondering what the Overtime Elite is. He asks him what the Overtime Elite is, hoping he'll explain further. Gray tells him that if he has enough talents, the ticket in his hands can take him to the Pro League. Omari's eyes suddenly light up when he hears his two favorite words, Pro Leagues. Gray just looks at him blankly and asks him what his decision is. He asks if he's going to take the $20,000 or his dreams. Omari just stares at him wildly, with his mouth open. A moment ago, he thought winning $20,000 was the best thing that has happened to him. Now this. Omari just stares at him, bewildered. He wonders who this guy is. It's odd that he's carrying around $20,000, and now he's making claims that he can take him to the pro leagues. Our guy's imagination quickly kicks in, and he sees himself in a big basketball stadium. He wonders if this guy can really take him to the pro leagues, or if he's just trying to swindle him off his money. While he thinks, Gray interrupts his thoughts and gives him something to consider before he makes a decision. He tells him that this isn't a direct ticket to the pro leagues, as he probably must have guessed. Rather, it's an opportunity to get into the pro leagues. Omari listens to him closely to know if this is worth losing $20,000 over. Gray continues and tells him that what he chooses to do with the opportunity is left to him, so he can't be blamed for how things turn out. He explains that his job as a scout is to find the greatest prospects in the world of basketball and to help them blossom. When Omari hears the word scout, he sarcastically asks if he is the scout of a college team, because if that's the case, he's just bluffing about being able to get him into the pro leagues. His words make Gray laugh, and he tells him that's not the case, but he's scouting for something more interesting. With a smirk on his face, he declares that he's a scout for the Overtime Elite. To explain further, Gray tells him that every year, billions of dollars flow into professional basketball. This money comes through players, advertisers, live events, and investors, to name a few. He asks Omari how he thinks all the basketball legends he has come to know and love came to be. Gray asks what he thinks of a secret society of the world's wealthiest and most powerful basketball enthusiasts, who gather a private league featuring the rise of the world's next great talent. Gray mentions that he knows Omari thinks he's crazy, but he tells him it's in fact true. Apparently, there's a secret world of basketball that fuels the professional leagues by recruiting new people who have shown great potential. That secret world is the Overtime Elite. He explains that it's a way for the most powerful basketball executive to invest in a rising talent early enough to make enough money as they become stars. This opportunity also creates a path for athletes with great potential to truly shine before the real gatekeepers of professional basketball. Lastly, Gray mentions that with the billions that flow into Overtime Elite, they've managed to build the Overtime Elite Academy. This academy is a basketball institution powered by state-of-the-art technology that was created to train the prospects into basketball future stars. He explains that in this institution, basketball is baked into every aspect of their lives while they're students. They eat basketballs, breathe basketballs, and live in basketballs. Not literally anyway. Accessing the latest tech gadgets to use to train, passing classes, and even getting better dorm rooms are based on how well they perform and are awarded to the very best. The Academy's top performers are eventually those who graduate to the professional leagues, while the bottom feeders are expelled each month so they don't take up space. After he's done explaining, Gray asks him one last time if this ticket seems interesting to him. Omari suddenly starts to blush. The thought of a school that trains and sends talents into the basketball professional leagues is too much for him to handle. When the thought seems too good to be true, he asks Gray if he really expects him to believe that a group that sounds like the Illuminati is funding a high-tech basketball academy. When he asks Gray if he's crazy, he just scratches his head, wondering what else he can say to prove his point. Gray confesses that it does sound kind of nuts if he puts it that way. Finally, he tells him that it's fine if he doesn't believe him and tells him he can still take the money. Now this is a tough choice for our guy. He considers the $20,000 and reasons that it was too good to be true anyway, but he's not sure. The thought of the academy flashes across his mind again. So, he asks Gray what the catch is with the academy. Gray, who still has a smug look on his face, tells him the academy is simply built as a preparation platform for those they'd be sending into the pro leagues because there's no point to opportunity if there's no preparation. He flashes the ticket again and tells Omari that the ticket allows him to gain access to the tryouts that get him into the academy. He adds again that it's not in his hands whether or not he survives the overtime elite tryouts, and that is entirely up to him. Gray informs him that they have scouts everywhere across the world, and they have secret tryouts all over the world each year because people aren't supposed to know about them. In these tryouts, each contestant goes through a series of games to eliminate them. Those who fail will have the doors of pro basketball forever closed to them. But there are going to be the top 9 athletes who emerge from each tryout, and these are the ones who are going to be admitted into Overtime Elite Academy. Omari thinks to himself that all that sounds really competitive, and he starts to sweat. He thinks to himself that the worst part is that they probably went through the same test he went through and passed, which means their skills are going to be no joke. The air becomes tenser as he weighs his options. He remembers that he has been waiting his entire life for an opportunity just like this one. Gray just stares at him while smiling, realizing the war that must be going through his mind. Omari thinks to himself that becoming a professional basketball player has always been his dream since he was a little kid, so he doesn't understand why he's hesitating when he's finally gotten that opportunity. Gray breaks the ice and tells him it makes sense that he'd be scared to take such an opportunity because it's high risk. He tells him the deal isn't for everyone, so he points at the briefcase and reminds him that he can still take the money if he's desperate for that. He also reminds him that if he truly believes in himself and his future as a professional basketball player, then the decision should be a no-brainer. Omari's eyes widen, and he opens his mouth as he realizes what Gray is getting at. If he doesn't take the ticket, then it would really mean he doesn't believe in himself. Gray reminds him that it's fine if he takes the money, but the ticket could be worth much more than just $20,000 for him. He gets straight to the point and asks him the question that's on both of their minds. Gray tells him that the real question is not if he wants the ticket, but if he believes in himself. Omari just stands there, unsure of what to do. At this point, he's between the devil and the deep blue sea. We skip to the point where Omari is seen climbing the ladder by his room's window, trying to sneak back into the house without alerting his auntie. When he gets back on the iron railing, he drags the briefcase with him. He slowly pushes up the window and holds the briefcase tightly. It looks like our boy went for the sensible decision. He holds the briefcase tightly as if his life depended on it. He won't want to lose such a great treasure because there's no way he'd live with himself. Meanwhile, Gray is seen discussing with the rest of the scouts at a board meeting. The rest of the scouts ask him if he's met his quota for the number of potential candidates he's allowed to bring into the tryouts. Gray just smiles and tells the man that it's hard to find talent worthy of the tryouts, but he's managed to find a few. The man notices the smug look on his face and mentions that it's rare to see. Realizing that it can only mean one thing, the man asks if he's smiling because of what he's thinking. Gray immediately recognizes what he's talking about, and a smile breaks out on his face as he affirms the man's suspicions. He tells him plainly that one of the contestants he's found is definitely a wild card, which is exactly what he had said they needed in the overtime elite tryouts. Gray mentions that whether or not this specific contestant cashes in the ticket is completely up to him. At the house, Gray opens the briefcase and peers into it to look over its content. When he opens it, we see the silver ticket for the overtime elite tryouts glistering inside of it. This means he chose his dream over the money. Gray continues by telling the man that he's certain that his secret candidate will cash in the ticket because he had turned down a $20,000 offer because of it. Sometime later, Omari is seen heading somewhere with the ticket. Meanwhile, the other scouts at the table are surprised to hear what Gray had said. One woman exclaims and asks him if he really offered a high schooler $20,000 and asks if he's lost his mind. One other guy blankly tells him that crazy actions don't necessarily translate into results. Another friend of his reminds him that this is his last chance to find a candidate who will actually survive the tryouts. Gray just adjusts his glasses like he always does, and tells them he'll give them those perfect candidates this time. The men remind him that none of the people he's brought recently made it to the final round, but he tells them to wait and see. A week later, Omari walks into a dead end where he is told to bring the ticket. He sees a brick wall and wonders if this is really the address that was given to him. He exhales in frustration and tries to make sense of his situation. He holds out the ticket, wondering if he missed his road. Suddenly, a computerized system scans his ticket through the walls and mentions that overtime elite trial participant number 300 has been confirmed, referring to him. The wall suddenly starts to open, and it looks like some Harry Potter stuff. A secret door pops out from behind the brick wall and exposes a bright new world that had been hidden there all along. The system welcomes him to the next generation of basketball and waits for him to walk in. Omari thinks to himself that he's done living a life that he doesn't want to live. While he's thinking, the system reminds him that sharing any information about the Overtime Elites or its affiliates will result in a lifelong ban from all things basketball. Wow, these guys really have some reach. Omari doesn't even listen to all that, and he imagines a new life where he can finally provide for his family and chase his dreams at the same time. He decides that this ticket is the way he's going to finally bring those things to pass. With a determined look in his eyes, he tells himself that he's going to join the Overtime Elite and achieve his dream of becoming a professional basketball player. So he steps inside and climbs a series of stairs. Omari buoyantly walks past the stairs into a futuristic room. While he walks, he thinks to himself that he can't believe that he's here. He wonders what his aunt will do if she finds out he is skipping work and avoiding school just to go play some basketball. An image of his auntie sniffing the knife she'd used to gut him flashes across his mind, and he starts to sweat. He reasons that the worst part is not her finding out he had secretly gone somewhere, but that he had turned down $20,000, which will certainly make her kill them. He continues to sweat profusely due to fear of his aunt. Omari braces up and tells himself he doesn't even want to think about it. He takes courage and proceeds to continue what he started. He decides that all this risk is the very reason that he has to make this opportunity count. He remembers when he was a child and was playing on the basketball court while his aunt watched and cheered him on. He decides that he's going to bring back the impossible dream he had many years ago to pass. He boldly walks through the final passage, obviously ready to face all the consequences of his actions. The world that Omari breaks into makes him exclaim because he's never seen anything quite like it. In the room, he notices several boys, just like himself, trying to toss imaginary basketballs into imaginary hoops, and he notices some men in black behind them. Right in front of him, the men drag one of the kids away, who claims that he can do better. He begs that they give him another chance, but the men just drag him away. Omari watches the men drag the kid, who's now begging not to be taken away, and he wonders what the heck is going on. One of the men in black immediately recognizes him as participant 300 and tells him that he's late. The man tells him to pick a spot and put on one of the overtime tryout goggles. The man doesn't explain what will happen next and tells him he'll figure the rest out. Omari mutters the word goggles to himself, wondering why this entire scenario feels like a strange military experiment. He wonders why things are so high-tech since it's just basketball, and he walks toward the timer on the ground. As he steps on the timer, he immediately notices the kid right next to him, who is jumping up and down. He watches the kid expertly jump up and assume his throwing stance, and this captivates him. He watches closely and notices the boy completely focused on throwing the balls, so much so that he doesn't notice Omari watching him. He wonders what level of intense focus the guy must have. To continue his own game, Omari looks right next to him and finds a goggle similar to the one the kid is wearing, hanging on the terminal. He holds the goggles in his hands and reasons that it must not be so hard to just put on the goggles. He quickly puts it on so he can start his own tryout. He is alarmed by the sudden transformation of his environment as he puts it on, as the goggles seem to be some sort of reality-altering device. With the glasses, he can see the imaginary balls the other kids have been throwing. He also sees the percentages that are displayed on their hoops to record how many losses and wins they have. The guy next to him seems to have a perfect 100, while some other poor guy has gone as low as 23%. He finally understands why they've been jumping all along, and notices that the guy next to him has a score of 100%, which means he hasn't missed a single shot so far. Suddenly, a virtual character that looks like a basketball appears to him. The creature happily welcomes him to the Overtime Elite tryout and refers to him as Participant 300. Omari, who is scared to his bones by the creature, asks what the heck it is. The creature starts to frown and calls him rude. Probably a bad start for his game because this creature would turn out to be his grader. The little cute creature introduces itself as the Digital Robotic Intelligent Basketball Liaison, which is short for Dribble. The robot explains that he has been assigned to him by Overtime Elite. It also mentions that he can call him Dribble for short. The robot explains that it's there to help him understand what he needs to do in the different stages of the Overtime Elite tryouts. The robot explains that the first few tests are simple. Suddenly, a series of virtual balls appear right next to Omari. The robot tells him that his first game is going to be a shooting range game where he has to perfectly shoot basketballs since he has been categorized as an offense player. This must be from the information that Gray had given them about him. The robot explains that a blue basket will flash before his eyes for 3 seconds, and his job is to make at least 60% of his shots to proceed to the next test. Omari picks up the ball and asks the robot if this is really augmented reality because, oddly, he can feel the ball and its weight in his hands. The robot just brags that Overtime Elite has invested billions into their basketball augmented reality system and its state-of-the-art technology. It also further adds that there's no other system in the world that can beat it. Dribble cuts to the chase and asks him if he's ready for his 10-minute shooting trial, sounding like his high school coach. Omari starts to get tense again and begins to calculate how the game will go. He calculates that 10 minutes with targets appearing every 3 seconds would mean a few things. 1. He'd potentially be shooting around 200 shots. 2. He needs to make about 120 of those shots correctly to proceed to the next round because that's the figure that would equal 60%. He asks Dribble what would happen if he doesn't make it to the next round, just to know what kind of heat he's under. Although it should have been clear from the guy that the men in black just dragged out. Dribble tells him that, for starters, he'd be forbidden from speaking to anyone about his experience here. That's obvious. That's what happened in the Men in Black movies. You can never speak about what you see, or they'll wipe your brains. Secondly, it also tells him that he'd be exiled permanently from Overtime Elite, and he'll be put on their blacklist. Meanwhile, the Men in Black are seen carrying away another poor kid who cries for mercy. Dribble finally adds that most pro recruiters in the world will never consider him again because he's such a loser. Omari starts to shiver this time when he realizes the odds are against him, so Dribble cheerfully adds that losing this one game is equal to him kissing his dream of pro basketball goodbye. When he's done talking, Omari just shivers with the ball in his hands. Meanwhile, Dribble cheerfully asks him if he's ready, like every other emotionless AI system out there. He adds that he's behind schedule compared to every other person, and he'd like to move things along. Omari just blankly stares at the ball in his hand. I think he wishes he had taken that $20,000 right about now. He makes a bold face and tells the robot that he's already here, so there's no point stalling. He grabs the ball and prepares to make his first throw, and some lightning pops out of nowhere like usual. Omari throws his first shot and tells Dribble it's time they get started. Now, he's just as focused as the kid next to him. Minutes later, after he finishes the sessions, he thinks to himself that he thought those 10 minutes would be absolute hell. Contrary to his expectations, he explains that it only felt like moments had passed. Meanwhile, his stats are seen to be around 72%, which means he's missed a few shots. When the counter reaches 8 minutes and 55 seconds, he prepares to make another throw. He looks at the hoop again, determined to throw the ball correctly. This time, his stats have dropped, and he's at 59%. So much for being a wild card. Omari thinks to himself that he can't remember the last time he's done a drill like this as he continues to play. He shoots his next shot correctly, and his stats increase to 60%. He enjoys the fact that he's able to shoot to his heart's content and continues to reach for ball after ball. He keeps shooting balls and positioning himself for the next one, and he seems to be in another world of his own. As he throws another shot, he thinks to himself that he knows that he should have been terrified, but he doesn't seem terrified for some reason. Now his stats have slightly increased to about 62%. He continues to throw, and he reasons that this is the most fun he's had in a long time. This kid really loves the thrill of high-risk games. First, he loved the high while risking $20,000 on a single shot, and now his entire basketball career. He's giving some gambler vibes. Omari just smiles maniacally as he continues to shoot, enjoying himself. When the 10 minutes end, he realizes that he has passed. Now he's dripping with sweat. The system displays his performance and tells him that after 10 minutes, he could have taken 200 possible shots, but he took 181 and made 122 shots. That's impressive. Dribble looks happy that he passed because he would have to eliminate him if he didn't. Omari just reasons that he barely passed, and a lesser point would grant him an unwanted appointment with the Men in Black. After the test, the system displays another statistic that shows that 92 players were eliminated out of 300 initial candidates. Dribble just tells him that the little test was just the beginning. In other words, that's just warm-up. You gotta be kidding me. The first test is an endurance test, where each candidate is supposed to maintain their dribbling position for a full hour. Omari looks determined to wait out the whole hour, but some other guy nearby just collapses from exhaustion with just about 3 minutes left on his timer. He keeps passing the tests, and it comes to the third one, which is to survive dribbling through a very odd obstacle course 5 times in a row. The ground is so porous that he could easily lose the ball or fall into the ground. He passes the next few tests and ends up in the 5th one, which is a strength test. Every contestant is supposed to do 100 sit-ups and push-ups to pass this test. Omari just keeps at it, determined not to waste this opportunity. One other monk-looking guy just collapses nearby due to exhaustion. It's possible he spent too much time meditating instead of working out. After doing 100 sit-ups and 100 push-ups, Omari comes outside literally shaking and confesses that he's exhausted. Dribble just tells him that it's time for him to do the last preliminary test before he can go to the real tryouts. Omari, who is now sweating like he just came out of a sauna, exclaims when he realizes this wasn't even the tryouts. He starts to imagine what the real tryouts would be like or the academy, and the crushing weight of the thought causes him to fold up. Dribble just continues and excitedly tells him that they had created a special surprise for him based on the data collected about him from the earlier conducted tests. The surprise turns out to be a holographic opponent that's created by the Overtime Elite system. Apparently, the system is an exact replica of his current playing skills. Omari just stares at the hologram in surprise. I mean, everyone wants a clone, but not one that would fight against you. Like every other gambling maniac who loves the thrill of odd situations, Omari just smiles at the hologram and says, "That's interesting." He walks up to his hologram, and Dribble explains that the next test is a simple one. It explains that it's going to be a 1 versus 1 game, and it's going to be a best of 3. A best of 3 match is a 3-round game. The big question now is, can Omari beat the current him in a game? Omari just folds his arm and smiles at his hologram, who just does the same thing. Meanwhile, at Omari's workplace, his aunt comes to the shop to buy something. When she steps in, she screams out his name so he can attend to her. She finds one of Omari's co-workers, Stan, on duty. Stan seems to be having an argument with some little boys who are making fun of him. Omari's aunt is surprised to see Stan because she's pretty sure our guy should be on duty today. She greets Stan and asks him if Omari is on break. Stan is shocked that she asked him if our guy is on break. He suddenly becomes morose and tells her not to mention Omari's name near him because he is currently covering his shift when he should be at home resting. Stan mentions that Omari contacted him earlier that day to tell him he's sick. Omari's aunt listens to him in shock, wondering where Omari could be and why he cooked up such a lie. Her eyes suddenly light up with fire, and she becomes extremely pissed off as she thinks about how she'll tear him limb from limb. At the Overtime Elite tryouts, Omari begins his 3-round game against his hologram while Dribble watches nearby. The game appears to be intense, and the hologram seems not to be giving Omari any breathing space, which has Dribble on his toes. Our guy realizes that Overtime Elite has really put a lot of money and time into its technology, because the hologram plays just like him, like Dribble had said. Omari wonders how their system is able to capture his manner of play right to the last detail. The worst part is that because the hologram is not human, it doesn't get tired at all. So, technically, it's the better version of him. Omari realizes that if it comes to a battle of stamina, he'll lose big time. The score on the leaderboard shows that Omari has 1 point while his hologram has another. One of them has to score up to 3 points to win the game, and things aren't looking so good for our guy right now. While playing, Omari wonders why he can't seem to be able to drive the ball past his hologram. While he's thinking, the hologram suddenly grabs the ball right out of his hands. Omari is shocked, and he realizes he's in big trouble because the hologram will go straight for the hoop. The hologram smirks back at him with exactly the same facial expression he gives after he steals the ball from an opponent. Talk about a taste of your own medicine. Omari wonders how the hologram was able to steal the ball, but it's too late. He wonders that they're just the same, and as such, he shouldn't be better than him. But the hologram just heads right to the hoop to score. As the hologram leaps toward the hoop to score the ball, Omari runs hot on his heels, but it's too late. On the Overtime Elite screen, Gray, some investors, along with a few fans, watch the game. One of the scouts mentions that the game is boring, but Gray doesn't say anything. The man continues to say that although Omari looks credible, he can't even hold on to the ball. The man expresses that he doubts Omari can make it past the preliminary tests. Gray, who is standing nearby, corrects the men by telling them that they would be unable to notice a wild card, even if he framed it and puts it under their noses. The man becomes angry and asks him who he thinks he is. The man makes fun of him and reminds him that he's still looking for contestants to bet on who will survive the Overtime Elite tryouts. Gray tells him to shut up and keep watching so he can get to see the contestant who will survive the Overtime Elite. Gray continues to smirk, and he publicly declares to them that he chose this wild card for a reason, referring to Omari. It's odd how Gray is still so confident in him when he's just 1 point away from being eliminated. The scoreboard quickly updates, and the hologram is given 2 points while Omari still has 1. Dribble exclaims and tells Omari that just 1 more basket by the Overtime Elite hologram and he won't even get to reach the tryouts. Omari tells Dribble to shut up and let him think, because what he's saying is pretty obvious. The tension is high, and Omari tries his best to gauge the situation. He reasons that if the hologram is an exact replica of him, whatever weakness he saw in him that allowed him to take the ball so easily must be in the hologram too. He watches the hologram stand in front of him to guard the ball and wonders how he can find that weakness. He finally exhales, realizing that what he's about to do is pretty risky, but maybe his card to winning the game. Suddenly, Omari tosses the ball to the hologram, and Dribble almost loses his mind because it looks like Omari is hell-bent on losing this game. Even the other scouts choke with surprise because they've never seen a contestant toss his opponent the ball. Dribble shouts at Omari, asking him what he's doing, The hologram just catches the ball thrown at it, and is also surprised that Omari would throw the ball at him because that is unconventional in basketball. Omari just ignores them all and tells them that he came here to chase his dream of becoming the world's greatest basketball player. He screams out that he's trying to find out his own weaknesses by watching how the hologram would drive with the ball. He claims that it would be better to give up on that dream right there if he can't find out his own weakness, because that would mean he's not even worthy of such a dream. Gray seems to be the only person not losing his mind, as he continues to smirk at the current development. Dribble just tells Omari he's really crazy, but he tells him it's okay since that's what they like over here at the Overtime Elite. The hologram begins to bounce the ball in a dribble position, so Omari watches him closely to catch the weakness in his position. As the hologram continues to bounce and look for an opening to move past him, Omari also watches him to see how he had created an opening for the hologram to beat him the last time. He reasons through the several moves the hologram can make, which include driving the ball towards him or shooting from where he is. He recalls that the only way to exploit the weakness that the hologram exploited is to do what he did, which was to wait for him to drive the ball forward. Omari keeps watching patiently for the opening. He realizes that just one wrong move here, and that spells the end of his entire pro league basketball career. He watches as the hologram bounces the ball from his strong hand to his off hand. As he watches the hologram switch hands, the realization suddenly hits him, and he finds the opening. In a heartbeat, Omari quickly goes for the ball and catches it while his hologram is passing it to his other hand. Omari runs past him with the ball in hand, while the hologram just stands there, wondering what the heck just happened. Meanwhile, the other scouts almost have a brain aneurysm from the excitement and unconventional nature of the game. They wonder why this kid gave up the ball. More, so how he was able to steal it back. As Omari charges towards the hoop, the hologram looks behind him, still shocked by what has just happened. Gray explains to the men what had just happened. He tells them that a common struggle for young players is having a weak off-end. He tells them that for most new players, dribbling with their dominant hand feels natural, but it takes discipline and training to have an equally strong off-hand dribble. Gray highlights that one of Omari's weaknesses is that he tends to quickly dribble to his offhand and then back to his dominant hand right before driving to the basket. Even though it's an odd habit or a quirk, Gray explains that the quick split-second switch in hands usually results in a better dribble for him, but it also makes it the best moment for his opponent to steal his ball from him. Gray explains that Omari just put his overtime ticket on the line just to force himself to learn his own weakness and improve his gameplay. Meanwhile, on the court, Omari goes for the win, while the hologram is hot on his tail. The hologram tries to block him, but it's too late, as Omari tosses the ball right over the basket. Gray explains that now that he knows his weakness, he's going to use it to win again and again. The ball goes through the hoops, and the hologram just watches from behind. After the ball drops, Omari picks it up again. Immediately, he tosses the back to the hologram, and Dribble almost loses its mind. He asks why he's giving the ball up again. Omari just tells him that if this hologram is truly built using data from him, then he'll have no choice but to make the same error again. The hologram just stares at the ball with despair on its face, realizing that Omari is right. Omari just grins like a villain and says that he, on the other hand, will never dribble like that again, seeing how easy it was for him to steal the ball during such a move. A few moments later, the scoreboard updates, and Omari has a score of 3, while the overtime hologram has a score of 2. Dribble quickly takes Omari to the next phase and tells him that the first phase of the Overtime Elite's tryouts has finally been concluded. They both step into a room with several other guys who have also passed the first stage. Dribble leads him into a locker room filled with other guys who are changing into the Overtime Elite uniform and tells him the second phase will soon begin. He explains that the second phase is player versus player elimination. Eventually, out of the 300 players who are selected to try out for the Overtime Elite Academy, only 9 of them will be admitted. These words just cause a smirk to develop on Omari's face, as he's a creature that thrives on a rush and the high of the moment. He tells Dribble he'd like to get right into it. As Omari proceeds into the locker room to join the other guys, he wonders why they're all giving odd vibes. All the guys in the room just glare at him and everyone else, obviously seeing each other as competition. Omari thinks to himself that they're all looking at him like monsters who plan to tear him apart. He notices that they all have uniforms already, and have taken out the glasses that they used for the previous augmented reality game. While he watches the guys, an announcement suddenly comes through a speaker nearby, congratulating the boys for making it through the preliminary tests of the Overtime Elite tryouts. The voice announces that they will now begin Phase 2. A large door that leads to the arena for the next phase suddenly opens while they're all listening. The voice announces that the remaining participants should have already upgraded to the lenses that are in their lockers. Omari, who's still holding his glasses, realizes they won't be using their glasses for the next phase, so he decides to drop them. He opens his locker and finds some high-tech lenses, which he commends since they're way more compact. The voice also announces that they can proceed to the next room once they've changed into the official tryout jersey. While still applying his lenses, Omari is shocked to hear that he's supposed to have put on the jersey and wonders why he's not been given his own. He screams out that he doesn't have a jersey and realizes that he's about to be disqualified from playing the game without even playing. He quickly runs to several of the guys who are heading out of the door to ask them where they got their jersey, but none of them answer him because they all see him as the competition. Out of nowhere, a young chap named Tien walks up to Omari from behind. Tien tells him that he found an extra jersey handing in the locker next to his own and asks if it's his. The jersey has the number 300 labeled on it, so it happens to be Omari's missing jersey. Tien tells him he can have it if he wants, and Omari's face lights up, and he even begins to blush due to Tien's hospitality. Our guy tells him that he's a lifesaver and thanks him for saving his behind. Tien just awkwardly scratches his head and tells him it's no problem. Suddenly, a really huge player drops his hands on Tien's shoulder and asks him if he didn't hear what he told everyone earlier. Tien's eyes immediately widen, realizing that he's gotten into some sort of trouble. The big guy, named Osar, reminds Tien that only 9 of them will survive the tryouts, which means that they're all enemies, and they shouldn't be helping each other get by. Tien just starts to sweat due to Oscar's towering presence. Oscar looks down at Tien and asks him why the heck he's helping Omari, referring to him as a shrimp. Tien starts to stutter and apologizes to Oscar. He tries to explain that he found an extra jersey that belonged to Omari. Before he can finish his sentence, Omari throws him over the nearby table, while Oscar's friends watch in satisfaction. Omari quickly comes between Oscar and Tien. He angrily asks Oscar what his problem is while taking a defensive position to defend Tien. Oscar is a few feet taller than him and towers over him like a giant. Oscar bends down and puts a finger on his chest. He tells Omari that he doesn't have a problem, but reminds him that he's the one who took his sweet time finishing his tests, which made all of them have to wait for him before they could go to the next phase. Omari just glares at him as he continues to talk. Oscar tells him that if he's that lame at basketball, then they should have just cut him already. The big guy jokes that it's funny that the organization is named Overtime Elite, and says they may not be so elite after all since they let trash like him get this far in the game. Oscar and his guys leave them and head to the next phase, while Omari tries to help Tien, who is still on the ground. Oscar tells them it doesn't matter anyway, and it doesn't matter how far either of them has come. As Omari helps Tien up, Oscar tells them they'll settle their issues on the basketball court. The big guy looks back at them and tells them he'll squash their silly dreams on the court. As the 3 guys step into the arena, Oscar jokes with his guys that a benchwarmer like Tien could never share a court with him. Omari tells Tien that Oscar is a jerk and asks him if he knows him. Tien tells him Oscar's name and tells him they're on the same team back home. He explains that the big guy has always been an incredible player and has spectacular skills. He further narrates that all that Oscar cares about is always being the best on the court. He says that Oscar will find a way to be the best on the court, no matter what it takes, and he tries his best to cast a shadow on everyone else, including him. Tien starts to think about all that just happened, and he suddenly bows to Omari to apologize on behalf of Oscar's rudeness. Omari is taken aback by his apology and just stands there surprised. Our guy eventually tells him he has nothing to apologize for since he's the one who helped him out. Omari asks Tien for his name and extends his hand to introduce himself. Tien cheerfully tells him his name and extends his own hands to shake him. Omari tells him he owes him big time and tells him his own name. The two look like they're going to be best of friends in the Overtime Elite Academy. Well, that's if they make it. Omari starts to change into the jersey, and he gives Tien some advice. He tells him that whether or not he and Oscar are teammates, he shouldn't let someone push him around like that. Tien just listens with a frown on his face, obviously regretting his relationship with Oscar. While they're both bonding, Dribble appears out of nowhere and tells them to hurry up because Phase 2 is about to start. Omari smiles at Tien and tells him it looks like they can get back at Oscar in the next round. Tien just scratches his head and says he guesses so. He looks quite unsure of himself, and it seems he had just said that for the sake of saying it. Omari jokingly smacks him in the back of the head and tells him to be a little more enthusiastic as they both head to the door to begin Phase 2 of the tryouts. Oscar agrees but stutters as he says it. The two boys cheerfully walk through the door and into the light. Not into the afterlife, but into what's next in their lives. As they enter the basketball arena, they find Dribble there, with some sunglasses, as he anchors the event. Dribble explains that only 136 players have progressed to the next phase of the tryouts. He announces that the next round is an elimination game called Dribble Knockouts. He quickly lists out the rules of the game, while the boys stand clueless and the crowd hails their favorite contestants. Dribble mentions that the first rule is that every player must maintain a constant dribble position throughout the game. This means they can't just be found standing around or doing illegal moves like traveling, which means to take too many steps before dribbling, double dribbling, or losing the ball out of their bounds. Dribble explains that they'll be eliminated if they do any of these things. The second rule is that players compete by knocking the opponent's ball from their hands to eliminate them. They must do all this while still in a dribble position themselves. Dribble explains that they can use any body part to knock away the ball, which means they're not limited to their hands alone. Dribble mentions that if a player is eliminated, there's no need to worry because they still have a chance to make it back into the court. Apparently, eliminated players become sideline defenders when they can re-enter the game by knocking an active player's ball and stealing possession. However, they are limited to the sidelines and cannot cross the boundary line around the perimeter of the court. Dribble continues that eliminating someone grants a player 1 point. More so, sideline defenders who successfully steal a ball will swap points with the player they stole from. Omari and Tien just listen, surprised at the odd rules being read out. The final rule is that ranks will be tallied up at the end of the round. Anyone that is a sideline defender or not in the top 18 players with the highest points at the end of the 10-minute timer will be banned from the game. This means only 18 of them will make it out this time from the 136. The crowd begins to cheer loudly once the rules are announced. Dribble announces that scouts, sponsors, and superfans can now place their bets. He tells them he hopes they were watching closely during the Phase 1, and he hopes they have their favorite picks since they have plenty of fantastic athletes today. Once the announcement is made, several of the scouts, sponsors, and superfans start to place bets as low as $5,000 to as high as $23,000. Dribble asks the fans if they know which of the contestants have the potential to become one of the greatest players in basketball history. While they place their bets, the boys just stand there like horses waiting for their owners to place their bets on them. Dribble announces that tonight they'll find out who has such potential. Omari's gaze wanders, and he notices Oscar and his gang by his right-hand side. Oscar looks at him with an evil grin on his face, hell-bent on destroying him. As the game is about to begin, Dribble cheerfully recaps the rules of the game, while the boys just stand in anticipation. A board is displayed that contains all the rules that Dribble had read out moments ago. Once the board has been displayed, Dribble orders that the game begin and basketballs suddenly appear in the hands of all the contestants. As the countdown begins, even Omari and Tien have their basketballs materialize in their hands, and it surprises them. The countdown continues, and the fans wait to watch the game, hoping they bet their money on the right horse. When the countdown runs out, Dribble instructs the boys to begin the game. Suddenly, the boys start to bounce their balls in their hundreds, and everyone tries to hit the ball out of the hands of anyone close to him. It's a frenzy, and the boys fight like maniacs, both to score points and to continue playing. Meanwhile, Omari successfully knocks the ball out of the hands of one of the opponents, while some other guy tries to hit his hands. He thinks to himself how all these players are trying to eliminate each other in such a tight space. Like the high-loving freak that he is, he starts to enjoy the rush. In a matter of seconds, he avoids two guys who try to grab his ball and knocks out the ball out of another guy's hand as he makes his way across his court. Suddenly, Omari runs into Tien, who is also making his way across the court. The duo stop right in their tracks, shocked to see one another. Omari is surprised to see Tien and doesn't try to hit the ball out of his hand because they're friends. As they both stand in front of each other, Omari wonders what he's going to do. Suddenly, Tien reaches for his ball and attempts to hit something. Omari is surprised that he'd try to hit the ball out of his hands and realizes he's hesitated for too long. Actually, Tien moves past him and knocks the ball out of the hands of some other guy who was trying to eliminate Omari from behind. Omari looks behind him and realizes he wasn't Tien's target after all. The guy who Tien disqualified starts to curse as his basketball dematerializes. Omari is shocked to find out that Tien saved him. He suddenly reasons that that's how the game should be played, because in a game where everyone is trying to eliminate each other, having allies increases your chance of survival. Tien just stands there while passing him the ball from one hand to the other, and he smiles at Omari. The system awards Tien with one more point for successfully eliminating one of the contestants. While both guys are bonding on their newly found team, they hear a familiar voice nearby, which turns out to be Oscar, who has been looking for them all along. He approaches them with an evil grin, along with members of his team, and tells them he was worried he won't find them amidst the frenzy. He tells them he's here to keep the promise he had made them in the locker room and grins widely. Omari and Tien frown at him, and Omari seems tired of running into them, referring to them as a holes. Omari just glares at them, waiting for Oscar and his guys to make the next move. Oscar tells his minions to get them, and two of them happily dash towards Tien and Omari while still maintaining their dribble position. Omari reasons that it's going to be a 2-on-2 game, so he and Tien prepare to take on one of the guys. Omari quickly pulls back his left hand to dodge the advance of the guy facing him. He thinks to himself that the guy's attack wasn't so bad, and he quickly bounces the ball behind him to his other hand, while the guy looks for an opening to attack him. His opponent doesn't realize he's skilled enough to bounce the ball to his other arm from behind him, and tries to figure out what Omari is doing. Omari tells him himself the guy may be good, but he's prepared for him because he's one step ahead. He quickly grabs his ball with the other hand, swerves under his opponent's reach, and proceeds to land his counterattack. Our guy reaches upwards as he slides and aims at his opponent's hand. He hits his opponent's hand, and the ball falls out of his reach as he lets out a shout of pain from the impact. Meanwhile, Oscar watches with bewilderment, wondering what is going on. It seems he has underestimated this brat after all. The guy who Omari eliminated starts to curse as he watches his ball fall out of his reach and dematerialize. Omari quickly turns around to check out how Tien is doing. He notices that Tien is playing